Okay, we're just letting everybody sort of settle in. So it's first of all, hello, welcome to ILC Home Webinar number 11. I only realised that recently that we've been doing so many, and it's great that you're all still taking part and tuning in. First of all, a big thanks to our corporate partners, Carpenters, GeoBear, CoreLogic, iCAD, Corventa, the Innovation Group, and Verisk. Thanks for your support in us having these webinars. This, as you know, on the basis, people that listen and participate in this are actually the claims world, the people who do things and can improve things. And the ILC, where we look to help people be better tomorrow from what they learn today, it come back to the desire and imagination of people that work in the industry to make things better and improve things, and the difficult job that we already do. So many thanks to all of us. There's been many of you. Any questions and any of the future ones, let me know. It's alan@iloveclaims.com. Next week, we are going to be taking a look, a more focus on vulnerable customers, because there's an increased amount of vulnerable customers and how we deal with claims just now. So we're going to look at that and some specialist suppliers looking at how they deal with vulnerable customers and some advice for all suppliers in doing that. And then the following week after that, we're going to take a look at data and building claims. And you might have seen in the ILC LinkedIn group a question about what difference data may make to how we deal with building claims, plan, etc. in the future. So that'll be there in 2 weeks' time. Back to today. We're back focusing, as we always do, in building claims, reminding you that the ILC Building Claims Conference will take place on the 29th of September. All the information is available for you in that one. Claims are unpredictable, they always have been, and that's never been more relevant than it is just now. We're not quite sure what's going to happen and how we're going to deal with things. So today we're going to take a bit of stock at the suppliers, insurers and contractors. We're going to have a look at what have been the challenges and what might continue to be the challenges in the near future. What have we gained over the 10 weeks? I think we've heard from all the insurers and suppliers we've talked to in the previous 10 webinars a real desire to understand and help one another through this. And also, what's the lesson that we've taken from it that means we might do things even better in the future? I'm delighted to have on board today Colin Walder, who's in claims supplier relationship. Most people will know from LV. Gelder, from the Gelder Group, has been on before. Introduced Paul Taverner, who's also going to be speaking at the building conference. Paul is the insurance partner at Bevan Britton LLP Lawyers. And Matt Clark is the Ops Director at Weston Homes. Welcome, Matt, for the first one. He'll also be speaking at the conference. Always, the views expressed are the views of the participants. I don't think there's any real right or wrong, and I say this every week, in what we're going to talk about. All there is are ideas and thoughts and processes which we can all go and think about, and again, hopefully help us all. We might pick up ideas or thoughts that go. So anything you have, there's a little questions, question and answer section at the bottom of the chat section. We may get a chance to ask some questions from that. We'll see how it goes. More than likely to do it. So let's start with Colin as the insurer. Colin, what challenge have you seen, and what challenges do you think you still might have in the future as an insurer dealing with building claims in the current environment?
Okay, morning Alan, morning everybody. I think the biggest challenge that probably hit us straight off the bat back in early March was the fact that the needs of your customers completely changed. You went from a place where everybody wanted everything done yesterday to everybody didn't want anyone visiting. We had to stick a load of claims on hold. People were very much more focused on the health of themselves, their families, and people that they weren't able to see anymore that they normally would have been. And we started off with making sure that any urgent claims that meant that the policyholder could continue to live in the property. We then stretched into all sorts of strange new worlds where we needed to focus on the vulnerable, as you've just mentioned. I probably won't go into that too much if it sounds like you're covering it next week. Sue Thompson in our home claims area was specifically tasked with looking at the NHS workers and key workers, and we trawled through all of our claims to look to see if there was any way we could get those settled quicker and easier, make their life easier, because they had such an important job to do at that point in time. That was probably our first challenge. We've still got the back end of that challenge to come, which is now sorting out the whip from 12 weeks, where a lot of claims haven't moved very far. And so there's quite a bit of planning, I think, is going to be needed, and an awful lot of collaboration between ourselves as the insurers, the adjusters who help out particularly on the large project managed claims, all the way through to the drying companies and the contractors at the end, who we ultimately always beat up for not finishing the jobs on time, but we know that it's the 6 passes of balls in between the chain that have got to them first that have probably slowed things down for them. I'm sure Matt will appreciate that when he gets there.
Cheers, Colin.
Okay, yeah, Matt, what challenges have you faced, and what challenges do you think you're going to continue to face?
Oh, God. So I suppose initially trying to run a business, we're fortunate that we're still talking and all of our businesses are still operational. There's a lot of businesses, we're not in one of those sectors where they've not had any customers. Fortunately, we are getting instructions and we're building WIP. So we're looking forward to a very strong 6 to 12 months ahead. But yeah, initially it's scaling the business back, because there's like Colin was saying, we were focusing on the key workers, focusing on those claims where maybe unoccupied, so we could complete the work safely. And now it's trying to adopt a new way of working, where we've got individual trades in properties, or they're socially distancing from one another whilst working, additional PPE, segregating customers within the property, using antibacterial fogging when the guys leave at the end of the day. It's a very different way of working, but what I've found, I spoke to my staff this morning and they all messaged me. It's really good, actually. They were quite excited with me being on. They were saying they've strengthened the relationships with the customers, and they feel they've got stronger relationships with internally within the business as well, with their colleagues, because I think when you change the environment you work in, you adapt. You have to adapt, and we've created stronger bonds. We talk electronically over groups within the business whilst people are home working, and yeah, it's positive. We're nowhere near we're nowhere near recovering, and I think we're talking probably another couple of months before we can kind of have some normality in terms of troops on the ground working, and we've got to try and do what we can to recover from the trading losses that have been I'm sure Steve will probably say something similar, but the overhead cost of the business hasn't gone away, but yet we've not been able to actually deliver much work on site for 2 months. So yeah, you've got that cost, and we've got to try and recover as quick as we can. Yeah, in terms of, I don't know how much you want me to go into different things, Alan, or do you want me to say something?
No, but I'm sure we'll go into a few.
Okay. All right.
One, Matt, and Steve, what Matt was saying there, we know there was difficulties last time you're on at the beginning. How does that affect things like the government are giving us? So we know, and we've heard from a number of insurers on here that they're keen on giving as much help as they can to the suppliers, but also there are government programs, etc. Are they able to help contractors while they've got, as Matt said, big overhead and not many claims?
I would guess that most contractors will be in a similar boat to us at the moment, in the fact that they'll have a fair bit of cash in the bank because they've not had to pay any VAT over, take a PAYE holiday. And then we have had some insurers, I would say include LV in this, who have been amazing at just getting debt paid down. Working for public bodies such as the NHS, and schools and hospitals, they've literally cleared all their debt, been paying over things like retentions, which when you're in our game, we've probably run a retention account of £750,000 on the public sector. So they've been very proactive doing that. Where I am with it is looking forward, because I can see a downturn in general construction work. But a lot of this help we've been given we've still got to make the PAYE payments and the VAT payments. And one of my issues is accessing the government corona loan. So we've put an application in, quite a big application for the size of, bearing in mind the size of the company. But one thing that's been thrown back at us is with our insurance book, we have to have debtor days below an average of 55, which we're not achieving. So that's really, despite everything LV have done and some insurers have been amazing, that's really where the biggest challenge seems to be at the moment for me.
Okay. Paul, looking at some of the things you've heard there, and I know from when we've talked before, issues that legally arise out of these things and out of insurance claims tend to come quite well after the event. From your experience, can you see some of the dangers that some of the guys are going to face here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge in the short term, just reflecting on what Colin and Steve have said around, you know, how to manage working practices as the lockdown eases, is, I think you're absolutely right, Colin, there probably has been, immediately post-lockdown, a general reaction amongst policyholders of, I don't want any more work done, I don't want anyone in my house, which is quite an unusual situation. As you say, pre-lockdown, everybody wants everything done ASAP. And I think particularly with, you know, shenanigans of various government advisors who remain unnamed and the easing of the lockdown, that public expectation will probably change. So if there is a scenario where policyholders change as a whole from not wanting contractors in their house or working around their house to thinking, well, actually, let's get on with it. I've been sat here in a water damaged home or whatever for too long now. I want it sorted out. There could be a real surge in demand from policyholders to get work actioned at a time when insurers and supply chain contractors are actually going to be working under really tricky conditions in terms of how they can work. You know, the lockdown, I don't want to sound too parasitic about this, but the lockdown has kept lawyers incredibly busy, as you'd probably expect. And a lot of that busyness seems to have been around preparing and disseminating advice notes. I get about 30 a day from various law firms saying, oh, this is the latest on what you should and shouldn't be doing. But a lot of that is focused around sort of office-based environments and health and safety assessments and requirements, ELPL issues for getting back to work in a static environment, whereas the challenges around having employees working in a policyholder's home, working in multiple different locations, how they get there, how they get back safely, how far it's reasonable for them to travel, are a real challenge, I think, particularly for the supply chain contractors. And I think the biggest difficulty is going to be balancing being able to work safely in the lockdown easing and not exposing yourselves as an employer to claims from your employees or members of the public against probably a real increased upturn in demand from policyholders. So come on, you know, the situation's changed now. Let's get these claims, let's get the work done at my house sorted.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I mean, that's quite interesting from the fact that we're all running about trying to do things new, but we're not quite sure what might come back as on us. Looking at the challenges from an insurance perspective, Colin, how do you keep your suppliers involved, given that they may still in the future have challenges over things like materials, and trying to get them ready for what sort of releasing claims might come through? Because I guess we're not sure what's, as we discussed last week, what is going to be fulfilled or what might be settled through cash, etc. So how are you keeping your suppliers involved in that?
So Andy Williams, who looks after our builder contractor network, hosts, I think it's twice a month, he has a meeting with the North builders and the South builders, excuse me, which seems to be really well received. I think that they have a discussion around whether they've got issues with PPE, whether they've got issues with plaster still somewhat scant around the country, but also sharing concepts and ideas as to how to approach certain customer problems. And the fascinating thing listening in for me is that these are Andy's guys who he looks after, but we invite in the loss adjusters to come and listen. We've got CT, the emergency company, coming to join in next week, and we're going to bring in the surveyors on the larger claims as they start to move through, and that really is what I'm sure Steve will tell you, that the builders need the larger claims to get to them. When you're trying to deal with a bulk whip problem, what you don't need from insurers is loads of small claims that are irritating. So actually insurers can help by cash settling some of those out of the way. I think that's the key bit is making sure that you've got avenues of communication open, you're clearing your debt down so that that's not an issue for anyone, and pick up your phone, speak to each other. I think that's the key thing. Emails backwards and forwards do not help anyone. If you speak to each other, that is always going to be an open format of communication where you're able to understand what it is your suppliers really need. We all get too many emails, and sometimes it's too difficult to look through them all and pick out what's important and what's not.
I think that's a very fair reflection. Matt, so is this communication coming across the board from all your clients? I'm not asking you to name ones that do or don't. I'm just saying because how important is this for you to be ready to release the right capacity and the right skills to the right jobs? Because Colin said he thinks suppliers will look for bigger jobs. A couple of weeks ago, I'm not disagreeing with Colin, but a couple of weeks ago there was some friction in that, because some suppliers were saying, give us smaller jobs we can complete in cash, come to cash quickly. Whereas quite understandably, insurers are looking and saying, well, we've got a lot of these poor customers sitting in alternative accommodation for a while, so let's get them back home.
So we've been speaking to our customers, a bit of push and pull, clients asking for it, but us also wanting to do it. We've been talking to our customers, trying to talk to them every single week. And even the small claims that we've got, might be worth sort of £2,000 or £3,000. They don't want to take the money. They'd rather just wait and have the work done when it's safe to do so, because they will probably have the same problem that Paul, you mentioned it earlier off before the webinar. They'll have the same problem that we have right now, getting hold of the materials, putting the labour on site safely. So in their mind, they're thinking, well, I might take the money, but actually I've still got a hole in my ceiling that I want fixing. So yes, there's a benefit to removing the small stuff and allowing us to focus on the larger, but we're a different size to Steve, and we for us there's lots of value in the sub £5,000 claims as well, because it's good churn. It just keeps the wheels turning. You can have that claim started and finished hopefully within 20 days. Whereas the larger stuff might last months. And although some adjusters are brilliant in terms of payments on account, interims, some maybe not. So talking about sort of, I know I'm not going to name any names, but there's differences in terms of the communication from different clients. You've got insurer relationships directly with building contractors, and then you've got adjusters, with their panels. And some adjusting firms have still got a lot of their staff furloughed. Some may be in their payments team, some may be claims handling, some may be technical. So their capacity at the moment to support us in terms of moving whip off and moving cash through might be less than the likes of LV, because I know LV, I don't Colin, come if I'm wrong, but you've not furloughed anybody, have you? I don't think, within your organisation.
No,
so you're, with an increased demand at the moment to support supply chain, you're meeting that. You've not taken the decision to save the overhead, expecting a downturn in income, whereas maybe an adjusting firm has reduced income right now. Whereas an insurer, I don't know, Colin, I don't need you to say anything, but insurance claims at the moment for vehicles is obviously down, you'd imagine. Home insurance claims, I've seen a slight reduction. More people are at home, so they're probably seeing things quicker and maybe stopping something becoming a medium size claim, keeping it as a small size claim, because they might spot the water coming through the ceiling because they're there. So I think insurers are probably saving a little bit of money at the moment, but adjusters, if they're not being fed the work, their revenue's gone down. So it's tricky. It's I can understand it, and it all comes down to commercial. It's all commercial reasons. You can't expect an adjuster to run negatively for 3 or 4 months. So it's difficult. It's difficult to keep everyone happy.
There is challenges, unquestionably, for the insurer there, Matt. But
I'm just pleased
balance it to balance it as well. Of course, they've got lots of people in alternative accommodation for 2 or 3 months longer in home insurance than they did before. But it's tough. Steve, how do you then look at what supply might come through? What are the things you need to be able to mobilise sufficiently for all your clients? So having the right materials, having the right people, having the right cash. Because I've heard a lot of stuff about, quite good people looking after the cash during this time. As you rightly point out, the tax man only gave you a little bit of a holiday, and he hasn't actually forgotten about it, as I understand yet. So what are going to be the challenges of mobilising and return to work?
Well, just initially going back to the LV call that we have once, twice a month, I actually find it bizarrely therapeutic because all the contractors are on there. And we've all got the same issues, around PPE, and he said this, and it's good to know that we're all kind of in the same boat, and the kind of LV attitude of putting their arm around everyone is really quite reassuring. What was the question going forward? What do you want to talk about, Alan?
Just how you will mobilise properly the business in terms of materials, correct labour, the investment, etc. What's going to be the issue with mobilising it? Because we're not clear on how quickly the mobilisation is going to have to take place. I'm not overly clear on how many claims are waiting. And of course, there's been claims that were started or not quite started and haven't finished from pre-lockdown.
Well, over the past couple of weeks, one person I think I should get back is our credit controller, because I've been doing it personally, and I think I've upset half the industry with my attitude to debt. So I need to get Nikki back quite quick. But going forward, really over the last couple of weeks, every couple of days, there's a few more people coming back. The merchants are slowly kind of opening up. We're now getting deliveries. We don't have to all click and collect. Stores have started restocking on things like that. So it's kind of like waking up from, I don't know, the whole industry just kind of slowly coming back into life. And there is quite a good feel. I think people are pleased to be back at work. There's a bit of good banter around the office. Still people are working from home, but they're tending to come in for a couple of hours, do some photocopying, see some colleagues, and then take work home. So we're all working in a different way. There's signs all over the place, and 2 metre distancing, and one person in the toilet at a time, and right through to the way we do things on site. But it doesn't really feel like it's too much of a problem. Some people just want you to get in the houses, get 1 man per van policy at the moment to get the guys there. But I guess what will come out of this will be a lot of inefficiencies, because just the way to get material to site, instead of putting 3 guys in a van, you've got 3 vans going to site, and there's going to be it's just going to cost us more to do the same amount of work, I think. But it kind of feels good that everyone's coming back and are pleased to be back at work.
Certainly, that's a journey that we're all hopeful and pleased about. Paul, one of the issues that might come out of this, I guess, is something that you've had to deal with this, I'm sure, in cases you've dealt with in the past and learning, but it's going to be more prevalent this time, is that when work is being done in something, or when work hasn't started an insurance job, and there's a holiday, for want of a better words, of 3 months or 4 months, and it then has to restart. Should people really begin back and making sure that the work that's required is still exactly the same, and that the policyholders are happy with it, to avoid what might be some real complications later on legally?
I think so, because clearly if you've got a progressive peril subsidence, for example, that could have got significantly worse, particularly with the dry weather we've had over the lockdown period. So if there was pre-lockdown a scope of works agreed to remedy a subsidence issue in a customer's home, and that hasn't been done because it's just not been possible to access the customer's home, then I think probably a TCF approach would require revisiting that and seeing whether further work needs doing. I think the other issue, just to come back to something you said, Matt, is around the cash settlement versus fulfillment side of things. Not so much around, customers making that decision now, because they can do that in the knowledge of what the scenario is. My concern is what might happen in cases where there'd been a cash settlement agreement pre-lockdown, but the work hasn't been done. So the insurer may have said to the policyholder, look, right, we've agreed the scope of works, we've agreed £8,000, here's the money, that discharges us of our ongoing liability under the policy. What if the customer then comes back and says, well, okay, we've agreed that, but I've gone back to the contractor and they've now told me that because they've got to work differently, they've got to include PPE and all these extra precautions, that their overheads have gone up and they're now charging me 20% more for the same job. What do you do there? Do you go back and say to the customer, okay, fair enough, the goalposts have changed and we'll give you more? Or do you say, well, sorry, we agreed, you accepted that money and full and final settlement of our obligation under the policy, and that's that. So I think that's a tricky one, and I say that with a slightly heavy heart, because I've got a difficult claim at the moment where we had agreed just before lockdown, finally, with the policyholder who wanted to go down the cash settlement route, finally agreed after weeks and months of negotiation what the scope of the works was going to be and how much it was all going to cost. My concern is that customers now going to come back and say, can't get it done for that amount, so I want to reopen the negotiation. So I think that's obviously only going to be a problem for a sort of certain narrow window of claims, but I can see that being quite an issue as well.
That's a kind of slightly broader call there for you, Colin, isn't it? Because yes, there might be an issue there with cash settlement, but you'll also have a number of claims which were scoped and priced prior to lockdown, which either haven't started or are in process and get interrupted, which may push more cost onto suppliers. How easy is it to deal with that, yet retain the right level of control, which you have to do?
Okay, there's probably about 3 points in there. Just to come back, I mean, insurers are always going to be in a tricky position when goalposts move, because if you have done your best to try and cash settle a claim to enable a policyholder to get on with their lives, or if it were a commercial business, allowing them to get into a trading period, we can get caught both ways. If you use the example earlier that cashed out just before the lockdown, if you took that to be a commercial claim perhaps on a pub, and let's say you paid the business interruption claim for the next 3 months or so, well, we've just paid out money there that actually that pub wouldn't have had any business over the next 3 months. So actually there are people who benefit out of these things from cash settlements. So it's not always a bad story. If a customer does have a cash settlement that was agreed just before, I would encourage them to talk to their insurer. I would imagine most reasonable insurers would look at this sensibly. I'm pretty sure we would, although I haven't got that clearance by anybody in my finance department, so I probably shouldn't make comments like that. But it seems sensible that there are things that have changed, and if they haven't had the building works completed because they weren't able to, there will be additional costs. I mean, exactly what Steve was talking about with the abilities on site for people to have to social distance just makes them more inefficient. So that's natural.
Okay. Matt, from your view, do you see much difference in the jobs that you started but haven't completed or have priced, and what you might have to do to complete these jobs? I'm not a figure because everything's pretty fluid here.
Simple answer is yes. We may have put, I suppose, if we had accommodation, you raised that earlier. I mean, if we had customer going into alternative accommodation, whether it be a hotel for a week, obviously now they can't go into hotels, so it might need to be short-term let. Now, at the moment, I think the short-term let industry is got lots and lots of capacity, so because everyone's at home, so that's good. But instead of actually them being out of the property for what was perhaps a week, it might now be a month. Because obviously me and Steve are singing on the same hymn sheet here in terms of one trade, typically one trade in a van, and you're keeping them, separated within the property. It's working, so it does become a bit difficult where perhaps you're doing a job on a fifth floor flat, and you've got heavy goods to get up there. In those scenarios, you've just got to, as Steve mentioned earlier about employees. are they happy to sign our risk assessment and carry out work? There's a little bit of restriction, anxiety from staff to do that, but then many are, we're following the government guidance, and I'll comfortably be within 2 meters of somebody, maybe the other end of a sheet of plasterboard, with a face mask. So jobs will take longer. It might be a bit of a delay because we'll then rescope the job. As Paul said, just because the schedule was approved, we may have started a small element 3 months ago. Well, now the job in essence may have changed, and the cost to complete may have changed. At the moment, we're not taking a heavy approach. I'm not told my staff to review every single job and put on what's needed, only to really react to those where it's a bit of an anomaly in terms of what we've got to do and the way we need to adjust. If there's just small things here and there, we're just going to do those things, because Steve will say this: you don't really want a job in whip. You want to be able to start and finish it as quickly as possible, and then get paid and move on. And I think you'd probably have that over and above trying to get costs approved, which might take longer, and go through the hoops. So yeah, there's it's speaking to the customers, creating a strong relationship with them, finding out how they were happy for us to work, coming to a sensible agreement. So it's communication really, and adjusting as necessary.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt.
Feedback from our staff is the customers have been really, really good. Keeping in contact with them, with our staff, have been really, really good.
I think we've heard that quite a few weeks before. That, of course, maybe begin to change as things change and time goes on. Steve, moving on a little bit, Steve, what do you think are the main things that, as an industry, we've learned from this, from your angle, in terms of, I guess 3 things that we issued was, process, customers, and changing demand, and like, what are the real collective opportunities for the claims industry moving forward in building claims?
Well, communication, I guess, it is important. Just keep talking to each other. And where we're working together with a common goal, I think we're getting through stuff quite well, and we're getting jobs completed. It might take a little bit longer, but insurance is built of kind of a small village of people, and as long as you all get on, it kind of just works, doesn't it? It's when you start to get conflict and things, that's where the pressure and the stress and everybody suffers, really. So where we've all worked together which is back down to where we are with LV, I'm sure their customers are pretty happy at the moment.
Oh, just from that angle and moving forward, we've heard over the last few weeks the great stories we're hearing from Colin and LV. We've heard it also from Aviva, DLG, from SAG and L&G as well, about what they're trying to do with the suppliers to help through this. There does seem to be some other issues that drag on, which are improving greatly in payments, and I know that the guys have worked hard through wherever these payments may stop to get them doing. We have known that a few businesses have gone under. What sort of difficulties does the supply present with the way some of the contractual things are placed with insurance? For example, some of the contracts are placed that once they've been selected, a contractor is then placed as being in contract with a policyholder, for example. But if a liquidator comes in, how might they read that?
Yeah, that's a tricky situation, actually, Alan. So I think there can sometimes be a tendency for the way claims are dealt with to be a bit of a mishmash between pure fulfillment or pure cash settlement. So at the risk of getting sort of techie legal on you for a minute, a buildings and contents policy is an indemnity policy. So the default position is that the insurer gives the insured money to reimburse them for their insured losses. And the option to reinstate is actually a contractual option added into the policy. So most building policies will say the insurer has the option to either cash settle or to carry out the work themselves. But the sort of techie legal bit is if you do go down the fulfillment route, and the sort of legal turn of phrase is the insurer elects to reinstate rather than cash settle, that actually legally turns the insurance policy into a building contract between the insurer and insured. So you've then got the query, well, if you've then got a loss adjuster who, for example, is using their panel contractors, and a contractor signs a contract direct with the policyholder, query whether that should actually be done, because it's not a situation where the insurer is giving the insured money to then pay the contractor. If you've elected as an insurer to go down the fulfillment route, you've actually got a building contract with the insured, so it should arguably be the insurer who's contracting with the contractor. So I think that is quite difficult, and the difficulty is if the policyholder is the only legal entity who's entered into a contract with a contractor, they're the only person who can sue or be sued on that contract, even though the insurer is sitting in the background. So I think a lot of the difficulties that arise here do arise from the fact that claims are sometimes dealt with in a bit of a middle ground where they're neither 100% fulfillment or 100% cash settlement, and that is something that I think does need a close eye keeping on.
Yeah, we undoubtedly work in a complex place. Colin, looking forward, what do you think are the main things that you've learned through this from, obviously from the suppliers where you've been doing some great work, but also in terms of customers and I guess the collective approach?
Well, things that I've learned is how to video conference, because if I'm honest, I wasn't very good at them beforehand. I've also learned that I get a lot more time in my day when I'm not driving on the M25. So that is really, really good news as well. The mileage on my car is far lower than it has ever been in any year. So there are all these major benefits. I miss the social side of it, I must admit. I find that very hard when you spend a lot of time normally with half the people who've been on these calls over the last 10 weeks or so. Not seeing any of them is quite strange. But I think what we need to try and remember is when we're probably going to be doing video conferences for most of our business review meetings for the rest of the year, is to try and inject a bit of fun into those and actually check on the welfare of the people that you're dealing with and interacting with. There's nothing worse than if somebody's already a bit stressed and potentially a bit lonely or potentially got too much going on. I mean, I'm quite lucky. I've not got any kids around the house. They're all grown up and gone away and off on their travels to universities. Well, maybe not this year. But it must be incredibly hard if you're at home trying to be a mum, trying to be a teacher, trying to be a cook and trying to do a job at the same time. I don't know how people do it, to be perfectly honest. So check in with those kind of people and just make sure that you don't overload them. There are other people around who are crying out for things to do because their week's normal work is really empty at the moment. So there's definitely some juggling to be done as managers of people, I would suggest.
Okay, yeah. Matt, from your angle, then, how have you mentioned it a bit earlier on, but briefly, what are the 2 or 3 key issues you've done to keep your staff up to date and ready to go and enthusiastic about the industry?
Yeah, so initially it was talking to everyone in the business, and to kind of, we rationalised the workforce. We knew there was needed, there was changes that were required. Because there was less work on site, we didn't need the quality assurance managers going out checking quality of workers. So it's either talking to them about redeploying them elsewhere in the business to support other key things to continue happening, such as credit control, admin, updating the WIP, keeping clients and customers up to date, or whether they go on furlough. And I've had a really open and honest discussion with everyone. And everyone's been in support of course, Matt, this is needed. I want to help you keep the business going, so that we've got a nice strong business to come back to. So it's been brilliant, in terms of bringing the government have been great. Haven't got part-time furlough, so actually as we start to ease back, we could bring someone back for a day or 2 a week, and then slowly bring them back to 4 or 5 days. And it's a bit of a shock. You were saying, Colin, you've got no little ones at home, and a bit of today is the first day I haven't got a little one here because Nanny has decided to look after the little girl. But normally it's 2 hours on, 2 hours off, sharing it with the wife. It's, you're working 14, 16 hours a day. It's if some, you almost feel a bit jealous of the ones that have been furloughed and have been in the garden for the last 3 months. But
depends how far they've been able to travel against, Matt. Steve,
yeah, of course,
this is an industry you've been in for a long time and stand up for a lot. What are the really good things that have come out of this for you that put you ready? Because you spend, I think you said to me before, you spend a disproportionate amount of time in this industry compared to the other ones that you're involved in. You're in mute, Steve.
A lot like what Matt and Colin have said, really. You've got some people you feel really sorry for. You've got some people who you feel a bit jealous about because they've got bugger all to do and they're enjoying the weather. And then I've enjoyed having my lads home throughout this. It's been good. So I've seen a lot more of those. I've learned a few new skills. I've done yoga every morning for the last week, which is a really weird thing for me to do. But, I mean, with work, you kind of learn a lot about your staff as well. We've got some guys who have really, really pulled it out during lockdown and kind of put themselves really out there. And I've got to be honest, probably not on the insurance side, really, but I've had one or two guys who have gone AWOL, so I'm not too happy about. But yeah, I think out of this, it's the kind of team spirit and spending a bit more time with your family and everything that I've enjoyed, and looking at life differently. But a bit like Colin, I'm meeting. I mean, we all get involved in emails, and some things get a bit touchy, especially when I'm dealing with credit control. But I miss not being able to go out and have a few beers with people and kind of strain it out, because that kind of is where you get a lot of your business done, really, over a pint, whatever anybody tells you.
I think the key issue from that is for everybody to know that should we gain any photograph of Steve Gelder doing yoga, we will immediately put it in the ILC news and website. Good. Because he'll have been doing it with his new beard as well. Any last minute bits of advice, Paul, for people who are going through this and about to come out of furlough slowly, steadily? Are there any other bits of things that you think they just have to keep an eye on in terms of making sure that they're keeping in the, as far as we can see, the right side of the legal system?
I think in terms of, well, firstly protecting employees, but also protecting yourself as their employer. As lockdown eases and people start to get back to work. I mean, Matt, you've talked about the risk assessments you've done. That's really important, because, all of the health and safety advice on this, and, typical lawyer, I'll get my excuses in early. I'm not a health and safety expert, but it's all about managing the risk, doing your risk assessment. But I think the worst thing you can do is do a risk assessment and then not follow it, because you have set out in writing what you should be doing. And if it can be shown you didn't follow that, you've effectively shot yourself in the foot. And I think the challenge is going to be, particularly if you're a contractor with employees working on multiple different sites, how you police in some way that employees are complying with the risk assessments, that they are social distancing when they need to, that they are wearing the PPE they need to, because it's all well and good for them at the office to sign up to a risk assessment saying that. But if they're not doing it on site, how do you police that? And if, for example, you get a policyholder getting in touch saying, look, you've got 3 guys at my house, they're not socially distancing, they're not wearing the PPE, and they're not following what I consider to be safe procedures, that, you're really going to have to follow that up with them, because if there's an audit trail showing you knew certain employees were cutting corners around health and safety and didn't do something about it, I think that's where you could end up in hot water. So, I don't think it has to be overly complicated, but it is a case of doing your risk assessments, making sure they're done for each job, and doing your best to make sure that the teams out working on customers' homes are adhering to what the risk assessments say they should do.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Again, we're approaching the end of our time. I want to say a big thanks to Colin, Steve, Matt and Paul. Great, particularly I always think it's great to hear the insurers and partners what they're trying to do, and it really helps us understand. As I say every week, it's dead easy for suppliers to say insurers don't understand us, but it's much easier to help an insurer if you understand the issues they face we've talked before about them, tight margins and low-cost products and stuff. And the more we understand about each other, then I think the better route forward for all our building claims. We are going to continue building up towards a building conference by looking at building claims. As I've said, in the next 2 weeks, we're going to look at specific focus on vulnerable people. As we've heard tomorrow, there's now more people probably falling under that vulnerable angle, definitely fall under that vulnerable angle for insurance claims. So we'll be looking at how specialist suppliers or advice to normal suppliers can help with that one. And then the following week, we're going to take a look at now the ability to use some of the data we're getting to help resolve claims, plan claims, and look at how we can see if it can affect positively cost service. So that would be very interesting one. That's in 2 weeks. In the meantime, remember, this is a place where we can talk about building claims, and we'll continue to provide this platform for builders, for suppliers, for insurers, and everybody in between to try and help focus us moving forward and learn about processes that can make it as better as your industry after all. So we will look at rates, structure, scope, all of these things. The building conference is on the 29th of September. Please remember some of our other things. Every Wednesday we have a very interesting webinar called ARC 360 with my friend Mark, who's excellent at it. We will be launching, if you look at our website, a new virtual motor conference, because the motor conference was going to be held at a time it's not going to be able to, but they've come up with some absolutely stunning ideas of how we can move forward in that. Thank you all for taking part today. Any ideas you've got, it's alan@iloveclaims.com. This will go out on a recording on our YouTube channel. It will also go out hopefully in podcast next week as well. So any of your colleagues that haven't heard it can listen to it in the car if they think that's going to be beneficial. And I think from the people we've heard today, I've got no doubt it's beneficial. We will see you next week, as I say every week. Thanks for joining us. Please keep to all the rules, look after yourselves, your businesses and your families, and I'll hopefully speak to you again next week. Thank you very much.